Welcome everyone to another week of Ramban ala Torah, Ramban ala Parsha really. This week we have the great zchus of reading Parshas Tetze. Just a housekeeping point, we're getting to the end of another cycle of Ramban ala Torah. I've really enjoyed giving the shiur. I've enjoyed relationships I've developed with people who I don't know, who write in comments, who I respond to. If people have suggestions for the next cycle, what we could do, I'd like to continue. I'm thinking it's hard to find a parshan as great as the Ramban. I was thinking maybe to go to the Sfas Emes, but if you have ideas, please write to me, leeli.weber, W-E-B-E-R, the number 5, so le.weber5@gmail.com, and come up with some idea. We'll do it that way. Okay, this week there's no narrative in Parshas Tetze. It's really, sort of what we would consider to be unrelated parshios. They're halachic in nature, except Rashi often points out, and the Ramban certainly doesn't disagree, the smichos ha-parshios, right? That there's a thematic connection between certain parshios in the Torah, and that's why they're placed in the order that they're placed. The machlokas between Rashi and the Ramban about yesh or ein mukdam muchar b'Torah, it's in degree, it's not in kind. Meaning the Ramban doesn't disagree that sometimes the Torah puts things next to each other for thematic purposes. He just thinks the Torah will explicitly tell me that. Otherwise, the order is the order. And Rashi, of course, believes that Noach came before Avraham. He doesn't think there's a random order, but Rashi is more liberal with the changing of the order for thematic purposes. The beginning of this week's parsha is one of the most famous, maybe the most famous smichos ha-parshios. It's always hard to say the most famous, but it's an interesting one. We start with Eishes Yefas Toar. We've done this before. I just want to make one quick point about Eishes Yefas Toar. Rashi there says, Lo dibra Torah ela keneged yetzer hara. Right? The whole point of Eishes Yefas Toar is keneged yetzer hara. Then an unbelievable, it's not really Rashi, it's a Gemara in Kedushin. Then the Gemara says, She'im lo yisi'ena beheter yisa'ena be'isser. Right? He's going to do it anyway. So that's kind of a scary statement. But the Ramban picks up on a slightly different point. I'm starting, 2 lines down the Ramban. V'hizkira katuv v'chashakta ba. The Ramban agrees with Rashi. It's about the yetzer hara, but he says, if it's not for the yetzer hara, how do I know how it works? Shelo yatirana lo rak mipnei hacheshek b'hiyot yitro mitgaber alav. Ramban says, halacha l'maisa. It's only if you have a yetzer hara that the Torah is going to allow you to do the halacha of Eishes Yefas Toar. Aval, im motzei ba'atzmo she'ein lo cheshek bi'ilata. If he finds he doesn't have an overwhelming desire to have relations with her, ela shehu rotzeh lakachat lo isha lo yisa lezo. Let's say in the middle of war, you see she's lovely, she has great midos, she's helping people, and you say, she's a good person to marry. I'll bring her home to my brother. He needs somebody to marry. Says the Ramban, no, that's also. V'kach amru b'sifrei, v'lakachta lecha li'isha, shelo toma hareze la'aba hareze la'achi. You don't say, I'm going to bring her home for someone else in my family. She seems like a wonderful girl. So here you see really a fascinating idea. It's all about the yetzer hara, and it's all about the subjective nature of the yetzer hara, meaning, maybe somebody would have an overwhelming yetzer hara for this girl, but you don't. You're not allowed to take her. Or maybe objectively, she's not pretty. She's not attractive. But you, for whatever reason, are attracted to her. That's how the yetzer hara works. Says the Ramban, Rashi's right, the Gemara is right. The whole point of the halacha of Eishes Yefas Toar is an attraction that's hard to control. That's why the Torah is matir it. If that's not the case, the halacha doesn't apply. Okay, you can try to get her to be megayer and date her and whatever, but the halacha of Eishes Yefas Toar doesn't apply unless you're overwhelmingly attracted to the girl in a way that's hard to control, right? Nothing is more subjective in this world than the yetzer hara, the idea that two people are attracted to the same things. It doesn't work that way. And here the Ramban is almost explicit about it. The yetzer hara is subjective. The yetzer hara is personal. If you have a yetzer hara for the girl, then it's mutar. If you do not have a yetzer hara for the girl, despite the fact that you think she'll be a wonderful wife and she'll be a wonderful mother, the halacha doesn't apply. there is no din of Eishes Yefas Toar under such circumstances. Okay, now, I mentioned the Smichos HaParshios, right? So the first Parshiyah within Rishon is Eishes Yefas Toar. The second one is Ki tiyena leish shtei nashim ha'achat ahuva v'achat snua. And there Rashi, again quoting Chazal, say, well, if you marry an Eishes Yefas Toar, then your other wife you'll have problems at home. You're going to have a beloved wife, you're going to have a hated wife, that's a problem. And if you have that situation at home, the next parsha is Ki yeh leish bein sorer u'moreh. Then you're going to give birth to a ben sorer u'moreh. Okay? Those are the three Smichos HaParshas that we generally speak about because they're literally next to each other within Rishon. But the Smichos HaParshas continues. Sheni begins, V'chi yihye be'ish chet mishpat mavet v'humat, v'talito to aleitz, lo talin nivlato aleitz, ki kavar tikbrenu bayom ahu, etc., etc. Ki kilat elokim talui, v'lo titamet atmatcha asher Hashem elokecha noten lecha nachala. So here Rashi also says that, if you have a ben sorer u'moreh and you don't punish him the way you're supposed to, then he's going to grow up to be chayiv misa and you have to hang him, etc., etc. Okay, so that's the end of that series of 4 Smichos HaParshios. But here the Rashi says something interesting that the Ramban disagrees with, and it's technical in nature. The machlokes is technical, but it's also substantive. Says Rashi, first of all, let me just point out the obvious, which it's always bothered me. The two psukim are almost contradictory. Right? It sounds like there's a mitzvah min haTorah if Bezdin kills this person to then hang his body. And the next pasuk says, Lo talin nivlato aleitz. Oh, but don't hang his body. Ki kavar tikbrenu bayom ahu. So there are often psukim in the Torah that are contradictory, but not right next to each other. If you just read the end of pasuk Chaf Bet, V'talito to aleitz, and then you read the beginning of pasuk Chaf Gimel, Lo talin nivlato aleitz, you say, what's going on? So halacha l'maisa, we say, yes, you hang the body and you immediately take it down. That's what the Torah is saying, which goes to this idea that I think appears a number of times in the Torah, that the way you can educate somebody that something's bad is by doing it. Right? You're not really supposed to hang a body. That's considered disrespectful. Right? In ancient times, if they hung your body from London Bridge, it's because the king really hated you. It's a desecration of the dead. Okay, you killed him, he's chayiv misa, but to hang him, that's almost like desecrating the dead. So the Ramban says, yes, when you look at it, you can't even look, you cover your eyes, because it's horrific to look at a dead body that's hanging. So the Torah does it for a minute, right before Shkia. He's hanged for 30 seconds, for 60 seconds. He's immediately taken down, and the mitzvah of burial applies. But it's a different point that the Ramban makes here. Let me find it quickly. V'talita oto, says the Ramban. Amu rabotein, this is Rashi. Kol haniskalim nitlin. If you get the punishment of skila, then your body gets hanged. V'zeh shenamar ki kilat elokim talui, v'zilzulo shel melech, sheha'adam asur bitmut diyukno, shel melech v'Yisrael banav heim, mashal lishnei achim domim, etc., etc. Says Rashi, right? It's like 2 twin brothers. One is the king and one's just a criminal. So when they catch the criminal and they hang him, the king says, please don't leave him hanging, because people will think it's me. So Ki'ilu, the simple understanding of it, which the Ramban disagrees with, the simple understanding of the mashal is, we are made bidmut yukno shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If we're hanging, kiviyachol, whatever it means, it's like HaKadosh Baruch Hu's hanging, so therefore don't hang us. But says the Ramban on the core point, it's not true that kol haniskalim nitlin. Rather, v'chol haniskalim nitlin divrei yachidem. Yes, it's the Shita and the Mishnah and Sanhedrin, but it's not the halacha. V'halacha k'divrei chachamim she'eino nitla ela hamigadef ve'oved avodas gilulim. It's a subset of the niskalim are hanged. Who is hanged? A person who, God forbid, curses God, and a person who worships avodah zarah. And says the Ramban a different shot. V'zeh ta'am ki kilalat elokim talui. That's why When people look, they say, the curse of God is hanging. What does it mean? Sheyomru, people will say, Mipnei ma ze talui, why is this person being hanged? Mipnei shebirechet Hashem, either he blessed God, but we know in the context he cursed God. O she'avad avodah zara plonis bekach v'kach avodah. The people who see the person hanging say, why is he hanged? And then they repeat what he did wrong. God forbid they repeat how he cursed God, or they repeat what seduced him to worship avodah zara. V'kach ot umofet ra'aba. He saw this greatness about the avodah zara, and so it scared. So it caused him to worship avodah zara. V'hasipur ba uva avodata yikra klala. When the pasuk says ki kilalat elokim talui, it means that this person sinned. You know, when you speak lashon hara about why a person was hanged, so then you're going to say something bad. You're going to either repeat how he cursed God, God forbid, or you're going to repeat what attracted him to avodah zara. Right? Another possibility, says Ramban, Oshu lashon zilzul kasher yizkir harav min v'hu kilan kila min nimratzet. It might just be just an insult. Ki mekalim lahem banav bozim. And last point, says the Ramban, v'hamashal bishnei ha'achim ha'te'omim yesh lo sod. Says the Ramban, no, it doesn't mean what Rashi means. No one who sees a human being hanging would confuse him for God. Einenu kasher chashav harav b'Yisrael shenikru banim lamakom. It's not what Rashi thinks. Okay, I wish I could tell you what the mashal means. I didn't understand it. It's a footnote in Chevel that tries to explain and tell you to look different places. It's some deep idea. But says the Ramban, the core point is not all the niskalim are nitlim, only in two cases, the megadef, a person who curses God, or a person who worships avodah zara. Now, just as an aside, it's interesting. The idea that your punishment is misa, we get. It's skila, it's sreifa, it's herg, it's chenek. The idea that after you get one of the daled misos bezdin, there's another punishment associated with it, that then your body's going to be hanged, you could see why that's problematic, right? It's a zilzul hames. Like, why are you doing it? Okay, so the Ramban thinks that the idea is you do it for a minute, technically you hang the person, and it's possible technically you hang the person, and that's part of his onesh, right? It's such a terrible sin, being migadef or worshiping avodah zarah, such a terrible sin. Not only are you going to get the punishment of skila, but on top of that, they're going to leave your body out. They're going to be mezalzel the mace, but only technically. It's almost like we fake it. We're going to fake being mezalzel the mace. Obviously, we're not really going to be mezalzel the mace because it is a real zilzul. So we'll hang him for 30 seconds or for a minute. We'll take him down and we'll bury him immediately. Okay. The next series of halachos in the parsha, broadly speaking, have to do with kilayim and shatnez and mixing two species together. So let's just do one little thing there. Says the Torah in Perek Chaf Bet, Pasuk Yud, simple Pasuk, Lo tacharosh b'shoru v'achamor yachdav. The next Pasuk is Lo tilbash shatnez, tzemer ufishtim yachdav. And the Pasuk before that is Lo tizra karmecha kilayim pentik dash hamalaya hazer asher tizra tvot hakarim. Okay, what's so bad about joining two species together? And even assuming that that's a terrible thing, why can't you plow lo tacharosh b'shor v'achamor yachdav? Why can't you plow with two different types of animals together? What does that have to do with the Isser itself? So, says the Ramban, and frankly, says the Rambam, right? That when you mix two species together, you're trying to improve on the Bria, right? You're trying to make a species that God didn't make, God didn't think was necessary. So we're generally against that. We're generally against trying to mix things to make something of a new nature. But what about the problem of lo tacharosh? Okay, I understand you can't breed them together, but what's wrong with hooking them up together to plow? So says the Ramban something interesting. V'amar lo tacharosh b'shor v'achamor v'hu hadin l'chol minei hakalayim. It's not just an ox and a donkey, it's any two types. V'hi mitzvah mivo'eret min behemtecha lo tabia kilaim. The Ramban often in Sefer Dvarim, we've talked about it before, talks about there's two categories of mitzvah. There's a mitzvah mivo'eret, meaning it appeared elsewhere in the Torah, and now it's being expanded upon. And there's a new mitzvah. It didn't appear any place in the Torah, and it's now appearing in Sefer Dvarim. So here says the Ramban, no. The mitzvah of the prohibition of lo tachrosh b'shov ha'chamor yachdav, he mitzvah mivo'eret min behemtecha lo tabia kilayim. That's exactly the isser of breeding your two different species of animals together to get a third species. Now the Ramban makes the point. Shederech kol oved admato lehavit simto berefet achat v'yarkivotan. Because once you put two animals together to plow, says the Ramban, you're likely to breed them together. That's what people do. They see them together, they see them getting along, they think, okay, why don't we put them together and see what comes out of that? Now, what's fascinating about that is normally we think that Isurim D'Oraisa, which lo sacharosh b'shor v'achamor yachdav is clearly an Isur D'Oraisa, that Isurim D'Oraisa are ends in and of themselves. The Torah wouldn't answer something for purposes of preventing something else. But here the Ramban seems to say that no, that's exactly what's happening. That the Isur of lo tachrosh b'shor v'achamor yachdav is so that the owner doesn't come to breed them together. Really what the Torah wants to prevent is breeding two different species of animals together, because then you'll get a third species and you'll try to improve on the bria or something like that. But here the Ramban is saying, this is a harchaka. It's like a mishmeret to not do the real Isur D'Oraisa. Of course it's an Isur D'Oraisa. It's a pasuk in the Torah, lo tachrosh b'shor v'achamor yachdav. But says the Ramban, the real purpose is kind of to prevent the core Isser, which is breeding animals together. In the Achronim, there's big discussions about can an Isser D'Oraisa be a harchaka or a mishmeret. Rav Yosef Engel has a big piece on this. His biggest proof, which is worth thinking about, it's fascinating, is the prohibition on Pesach of Bal Yiro, Bal Yimatzeh. Says the Ran that Bal Yiro, Bal Yimatzeh is a harchaka for the Isra of Achilas Chametz. We're so worried that you're going to eat chametz, we tell you can't have any chametz in your house. You can't own any chametz in your house, because otherwise you'll end up, the chas v'shalom, you'll come to eat it. So then, this idea, I don't know if it shows up in that piece, I'll have to check, this idea of lo tarosh b'shor v'achamor yachdav, so that you don't breed them together, would be a mitzvah saseh min haTorah that exists for the purpose of a protection of the real Isser Aseh, which is breeding them together. Okay, let's do, if we have time, two more Rambans. Pasuk Chaf Bet, Perek Chaf Bet, Pasuk Yud Tes. Says the Torah, a man marries a woman. Let's just read a little bit. The parsha begins, Ki kach ish isha uvo eleu snaya. There's a problem. V'samla lidot dvarim. He says he's motzi laz on his wife. Okay, the whole thing happens. They take the simla, they punish him, or as the Gemara says, they give him makos, and they punish him me'al chesef. So the Ramban has an interesting idea on they punish him me'al chesef. Okay, says the Ramban, first of all, what's really bothering the Ramban is what's with the multiple punishments. If if he's getting makos, we don't normally find in the Torah he gets makos and he gets a financial penalty. If you get makos, that's the penalty. So says the Ramban, V'anshu me'al kesef, acharei hamalkot hanidrash v'yisru, right? After the makos that comes from the pasuk that says v'yisru, which the Gemara then says means makos, Ki haminhag lichtov libitula mohar nun kesef. He says the minhag back then was to write probably a ketubah to give the new bride a dowry of 50 kesef. V'hinei ze hotzi aleh shem ra Ba'avur shesana, he spoke lashon hara about his wife. He said, well, she was supposed to be a virgin, and I had relations with her, and she's not a virgin, right? Horrible lashon hara. For what end? V'ratza lahotzia below klum. The whole reason that the husband made up lashon hara about his wife was because he wanted to save money, right? If in fact it's true that he thought he was marrying a betula and she wasn't, so then she loses her ksuba. So says the Ramban, v'lachein anshuha katuv b'meya kesef. Now here's the fascinating part. Says the Ramban, so Chazal punished him with a fine of 100, ki ha-Torah ta'anish b'kefel kinyan shnaim yishalem. Go back to Parshas Mishpatim, right? The classic monetary penalty for a crime is kefel. So he says kefel, meya kesef, happens to be twice as much as the 50 kesef that he'd have to pay her for a ktuba. Afal pisha ktuba midivrehem l'mi sheyitna ima o yisa enastam. Even though a ktuba is really only drabanan, it's a big machlokas harishonim. Aval haminhag yalichtov mohar lebetulot kimo shenemar kimohar betulot. That was the minhag. Varov yasukein. That's what people did. Vim lo hayta ktuba liisha hazot lama yasim ala alilot dvarim. Right? If she had no ktuba, why would he lie about her? Why would he say lashon hara about her? Mipnei shaba le'usneya yichtov laget v'yipater mimena. Let her just. He's allowed to divorce her. If he had relations with her and he doesn't like her, he can just divorce her. Dichtiv ki sana shalach. Right? You hate your wife, so you divorce her. Says the Ramban, no, the whole point of the parsha is that he wants to save the money of the ketubah. And if he wants to save the money of the ketubah, there's every reason to believe that the ketubah is 50 kesef, because that's what people gave. So then the Torah says, no, he has to pay double. Last thing, for people who think that there's something disrespectful to women in the fine that he pays, you'll see something as Vamavi. Okay, so he takes it to the father. Okay, sorry. So va'anshu oto mea kesef v'natnu la'avi anara ki hotzi shem ra al betulat Yisrael v'lo with a vav v'lo tihiyeh li'isha lo yuchal l'shalcha kayamav. Right? Says the Torah, part of the punishment, and there are multiple punishments here, in addition to the makos, in addition to the money, is he can't divorce her for his whole life. It doesn't mean that she can't demand a get. It's a little complicated. It doesn't mean they have to remain married if she doesn't want to. But in a situation where a man has been motzi shemra about his wife, and the word got out, it'll be very, very hard for her to remarry. Right? He may have ruined her life going forward. In the old days, that was certainly the case. And so part of the punishment is, you can't leave her single her whole life. That's not fair. Lo yuchal, he cannot divorce her forever, which I think is really, really understanding and really supportive in a very unfortunate situation, supportive of the woman. Okay, let's do one more. Pasuk Chav Gimel. The Torah tells us that the Jewish people go to war, ki tetze la milchama loivecha, and a strange phrase, v'nishmarta mikol davar ra. When you go to war, v'nishmarta mikol davar ra. So what's really going on in that pasuk? What does it mean, v'nishmarta mikol davar ra? So Rashi says, and it makes a lot of sense, shas satan mekatreg b'shata sakana. When you're in a dangerous situation, you got to watch out. The Satan might make things worse for you, and you have to be very, very careful. But the Ramban doesn't think that's the pshat. V'hanachon be'inai, says the Ramban, what I really think is true, be'inyan ha-mitzvah hazot, ki hakatuv yazhir ba'et asher hachet matzui bo. No, the Torah is telling us when you go to war, sin is much more prevalent. V'hayadua, says the Ramban, b'minhagei ha-machanot hayotzot la-milchama ki yochlu kol to'eva. When people go to war and they're camped together, bad things happen. They eat all to'evot. Yigzelu v'yachmesu v'lo yitbo shashu. They're not embarrassed. They're subhuman when they go to war. Afilu b'niyuf. even dealing in sexual immorality, v'chol nevela. Hayashar bibnei adam bitivo, yitlabesh achzariyut v'chema kitzeit machana al oyev. When you go to war, you become debased. You become angry. Va'al kain, he's here bo hakatuv v'nishmarta mikol davar ra. Va'al derech hapshat hi azara mikol hane'esar. It's not a specific point. The point is, and I never had this chus of being in the army. I speak to my sons, I speak to Talmidim in yeshiva. When you're in war, the opportunity to do averos, is much greater. Not just the opportunity, the Yetzer Hara, right? Part of winning a war, and again, I'm not speaking from personal experience, but I'm speaking from speaking to people. Part of winning a war is being subhuman, is not being merciful, is being a bad person. And I think one of the great things about the IDF is that it maintains its morality, even in times of war, right? Recently, originally the complaint for Palestinians were, why aren't the IDF raping their women? It must be that the IDF, that Jews don't respect Arab women. A bizarre, complaint. How come the IDF isn't raping? Now recently the fake news is that they are raping. It's not true. It's not true. One of the amazing things about our army, and one of the things to be most proud of, is that our army maintains its morality. And says the Ramban, v'nishmarta mikol davar ra, I think that's a mitzvah aseh min haTorah that the army is fulfilling. And it's really, really hard. In fact, the halacha is that kosle de chazir, if you're fighting a war and you have no other money, you have no other food, you could eat treif. It's not even usser, you could eat treif. And that does bring you down. And so says the Ramban that the warning, v'nishmarta mikol davar ra, is not the satan. It's that by definition, to win a war, you need to be something less than human. And one of the great things, I think, of the army, and one of the things we should be most proud of, is that overwhelmingly, we observe the lo taseh v'nishmarta mikol davar ra. We know we're going to war. We know that bad things happen in war. And nevertheless, we're better than that. We're above it. I could go on about maybe we should cut them some slack. It's hard during war. Rape in World War II, at least, and in most of the wars in history, rape was a part of war. To scare the enemy, soldiers raped the other side. And it worked. But God forbid we don't do that. We would never do that. We're not part of it. We are v'nishmarta mikol davar ra. Despite going back to the original mitzvah we started with, the mitzvah of Eishes Yefas Toar, which I think if you really look at it, we didn't have time to do it today, you really look at it, it is relatively moral, right? It's restraining the worst instincts that people have during war, and apparently people do have that instinct. And also, it's not a mitzvah the Torah wants you to fulfill. When my sons went to the army, I didn't sit them down and say, I never had this chus of doing the mitzvah of Eishes Yefas Toar. You should do it. It's not that type of a mitzvah, but it's there. It's on the books. And if it matters, it's done in a moral way. It's only once. It's a whole machlokes, but it's done in a moral way. Okay, that's enough for today. Yashkach to everybody. See you, God willing, next week. Shabbat Shalom.